Well, everyone knows that Pope Francis is visiting here in August, but few are aware of the pressures this Pope is currently facing from within the conservative wing of the Catholic Church. He's been described by some factions as a heretic for what they see as his more liberal views on church teaching. It's no longer uncommon to hear talk of a schism splitting the church in two. Here's this report from Donogh Diamond.
Talk of schism, a final split in the church being close. Cardinals publicly rebuking the Pope, loose accusations of heresy. This all seems like the stuff of a Dan Brown novel, but it's all true and it's deadly serious.
There are disagreements that can't be denied, yeah? And they are worldwide.
People have not been at peace with what the Church has taught on many of these issues.
It's hard to believe, but very senior churchmen are discussing the possibility of the Catholic Church being torn apart, apparently over a single footnote to a document issued by the Pope. If we're not in schism, is it very close to it?
It is, I think, yeah. I think it's very, very close, yeah. But I see it's not a formal, it's not an actual, like Henry VIII, he cut off from Rome, said I have nothing more. That is a formal schism, yeah. Material schism is that there's this division, that's a situation that can actually be healed. It's not inevitable.
If they're of the view that nothing ever changes, then they need to be worried, because something, as I say, quite revolutionary is happening here.
Of course, it's not really about the footnote at all. It's about what it means, or rather what some senior clerics say it means. For the Catholic Church, divorced and remarried people aren't married to their second partner at all. They're still married to their first one, and they're committing adultery repeatedly, enthusiastically, and in most cases without the slightest intention of repenting with their second partner. So how can a person living in a permanent state of adultery possibly be admitted to Holy Communion? So when the Pope issued this document, Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love in English, the focus wasn't on the document as a whole or even on one chapter. Instead, it was on this footnote to a comment that a person who is living in sin but might not be fully culpable, could receive the Church's help, and that help could, in certain cases, include the help of the sacraments. The Pope went on that he wanted to remind priests that the Eucharist is not a prize for the perfect, but a powerful medicine and nourishment for the weak.
The Pope has left a certain kind of openness there, I would say, and that is the nub of the question. Some of the leading cardinals have questioned, is this reconcilable with what his predecessor has taught? Yeah?
The unquestioned leader of the conservative reaction to the change is this man, Cardinal Raymond Leo Burke. With three other cardinals, he took the remarkable step of issuing what is known as the dubia, literally the doubts, expressed as 5 yes or no questions. This was dynamite. This was 4 very senior churchmen seeming to come close to calling the Pope a heretic.
Well, 4 cardinals afterwards, and then a number of signatories of a letter challenged the Pope on this, particularly on this particular footnote, and were of the view that this was, I don't think they actually said it out straight, but the implication was that in some way it was almost heretical. So we joke and say, is the Pope a Catholic? Well, they were actually saying, well, no, maybe he's not a Catholic in this.
Most Holy Father, said the cardinals. Theologians had proposed divergent and conflicting interpretations of the document, provoking uncertainty, confusion and disorientation among the faithful. As supreme teacher of the faith, they asked the Pope to bring clarity by responding to their dubia. Translated from the theological, the cardinals asked, was the Pope really saying that divorced people living as man and wife with someone else could receive communion? Was what Pope John Paul II said about some acts being intrinsically evil without exception still true? Was a person living with someone other than their spouse, and of course they meant their first and only church-recognised spouse, still to be seen as living in grave habitual sin? Was what Pope John Paul II said about circumstances not making an evil act good still true? And was what John Paul II said about conscience not being something that could be used to legitimise an intrinsically evil act still true? Because this raises an even more profound question. If the rules on adultery and communion can be bent to the realities of the modern world, what else can?
I think you can put down principles, general principles, but life is a lot messier than that, and that's one of the virtues of the Pope at the moment. He's asking us to take risks, even when we fall down, to get up again.
In terms of actual church teaching, etc., if you deny that actually there are no actions which are intrinsically wrong, then of course you have ultimately floodgates.
The more traditional people that you're referring to are seeing this as a Trojan horse, that this could happen with so many other issues as well.
So that's why this tiny footnote on what many of us would think is a fairly incomprehensible theological paper may be the sharp end of the wedge that splits the church in two. Because there is one point of agreement between the Conservatives and the Liberals. This really is an issue of huge importance. The Conservatives say they're deeply worried, and the response of at least some of the Liberals is crystal clear. They should be worried. If we get this, then married priests and women deacons will follow. But the forces behind the dubia and the more traditional teaching of the Church appear to me very much on the defensive. Cardinal Burke has been demoted. The standard bearer of the Liberals on this dispute is this man, Cardinal Walter Casper, and some who agree with his thinking seem to be very much in the ascendant. So could this dispute actually lead to a formal split in the Church? Or is it more likely that the defeated faction will bite its lip and stay, however resentfully, in the Church that means so much to them?
I'm pretty confident that when this huge crisis situation at the moment, that actually will resolve itself, yeah.
I think that there is good hope that despite the rather radical changes that I think the Church is undergoing, that it can be held together.
Pretty confident, good hope. What is striking, perhaps, is just how tentative both sides are in their claims that the Church can really survive this row as a single, unified entity.
Amen.